Come in, Chosen One. There are things you must know. The village is dying. The signs are everywhere. Withering crops. Dying Brahmin. Sick children. There is hope, however. A slim hope that few know of. The old discs speak of an item called the Garden of Eden Creation Kit. It is said it can bring life to the wasteland. This will be your quest, if you prove yourself worthy. For that proof, you must first journey to the Temple of Trials. If you survive, come back to me. We will talk more. Our life is in your hands, Chosen One. Prove yourself. Find the GECK. Be our salvation.
At 20 years old, the Chosen One was taken to the temple's entrance, where Klint, the temple's guardian, made sure they wouldn't leave without taking the mystic test. They had, after all, trained for this moment their entire life. Inside, they found a strange corridor made of stone, along with various obstacles they needed to beat. There were giant ants, radscorpions with venomous stingers, deadly floor traps, and Cameron, a tribal and expert in unarmed combat. While we don't know how the Chosen One passed the test, they could have used any combination of skills, but in the very last room, atop the stairs, they found the Vault Dwellers Jumpsuit, a relic of their grandfathers, and with it, they could prove to the Elder that they were ready to be the tribe's champion.
You have survived the Temple of Trials. Are you ready for your quest? Pay attention. Find the Holy Vault 13 and bring back the GECK. Vic, the trader from Klamath, brought us the flask from the Holy 13. Start your search with him. The disc will remind you of your task. May the gods of the vault watch over you.
Taking the quest, the Chosen One headed east towards Klamath. Upon finding the merchant's home, which was unlocked, they entered, only to discover that Vic was missing. After asking a few of the locals if they knew where Vic was, they learned that he was last seen southeast selling his wares at the Den, a haven for drug and slave trafficking. And it was true, Vic was at the Den, but he wasn't selling wares. Vic had done some dodgy dealing with the Slavers Guild and was now involuntarily repairing pre-war tech for the slavers, something he would very much like to be rid of. So when the Chosen One spoke to him through the window of his cell, asking for information about the mysterious flask, he refused to talk and would only part ways with what he knew once he was free. He then suggested they return to his home in Klamath and bring him an old radio, a task which didn't take long. After the radio was passed through the bars of his cell, Vic, desperate to leave this place, set about putting together a working radio, which he prayed was enough to buy back his freedom. But upon producing it to Metzger, the head of the Slavers Guild, he just laughed at the Chosen One and told them that a working radio had been their original deal, and if they truly wanted to buy Vic, then it was going to take a working radio and $1,000. Now the village elder had given the Chosen One some money, but it was nowhere near enough. Between the Den and Klamath, there are many ways the Chosen One could have accumulated the money to buy Vic's freedom, such as putting an end to the rat infestation in Klamath by killing King Rat, along with many other smaller jobs, getting books from Derek, and figuring out how Becky can sell her booze for so cheap, are just a few examples. And once he was free, just as promised, Vic told the Chosen One everything he knew about the flask, which, as it turned out, wasn't that much. While he didn't know where the flask had come from, he did know the man who sold it to him, Ed, a Brahmin dealer east in Vault City, who undoubtedly would be more helpful, or so they'd hoped. After finding Ed in the courtyard beside the Brahmin pen and telling him that Vic had sent them, Ed tried his best to remember where it was he found the flask, but all he could recall was it had come from somewhere along the big circle, which gave the Chosen One quite a few places to go. The den had been a bust, hopefully Vault City would be more useful. Approaching the gate to downtown, they watched as many people were turned away by the guards for not having a day pass. And just then, while considering getting a day pass, one of the guards signaled for them to come closer. He said his name was Wallace, and although he didn't know them, he did recognize their Vault jumpsuit, and strongly advised they go see Joanne Lynette, the first citizen. After some back and forth with Lynette, the Chosen One learned that Vault City had come from Vault 8. Vault 8 had used their only GECK to create the city, and once it broke, they recycled the parts and used them for other projects, which left the Chosen One with no choice but to search elsewhere. However, what Vault City did have was information on other vaults, perhaps even Vault 13. The only problem was, to access the vault proper, where the central computer was stored, you had to be a Vault citizen, which left the Chosen One with no other choice but to become one, which was easier said than done, because the citizenship test was practically impossible to pass, and Joanne knew this. So, in return for citizenship, she sent the outsider to deal with her power plant problem.
Rather than taking the test, you could prove your commitment to the vaults in a more substantial way. As an outsider, you are in a unique position to resolve a difficult situation for us. There's a town, if you could call it that, to the northeast of our city. It is filled with creatures that are polluting the groundwater with dangerous radiation. Those things are operating a damaged atomic power plant. You see, they are immune to radiation. They don't care that they are slowly killing us with their poisons. Disable their plant permanently, so that they cannot cause any more damage.
If Lynette was telling the truth, then these creatures were no better than raiders or slavers, and putting an end to them was probably for the best. But upon seeing the building, dimly lit by dying lights, were the silhouettes of people. One figure turned towards them, raised a hand, but instead of firing, it waved. This figure was Lenny, a short ghoul who before the Great War was a doctor in Bakersfield, and much like Lynette, had once lived inside a vault, only his vault's door had failed to close and the entire population were turned into ghouls. And Lenny had once known the Vault Dweller who came to Bakersfield, now known as Necropolis, in search of a water chip. Back then, Lenny had almost reached out to him, wanting to join his quest, but lacked the courage to do so, a mistake he wouldn't make again. So when he saw the Chosen One, he introduced himself and asked them if there was anything they needed help with. Lenny wasn't the kind of person who purposefully poisoned an entire city, and after meeting several other ghouls, including Harold, a mutant of sorts, they learned that the entire problem was nothing more than a misunderstanding.
Whatever it takes to keep this place together. Our atomic reactors are mighty sensitive. Although, if we don't get a hydroelectric magnetosphere regulator pretty damn quick, there is gonna be trouble. I'm certain those ornery bastards in Vault City have one. Not that they'd share. Well, they'd only help us if they thought it was in their own best interest to do so. Not much chance of that happening. They shoot ghouls on sight. Makes conversation a bit tricky. We need a hydroelectric magnetosphere regulator, and it needs to be installed soon, or we have got some real problems. If we don't get it, you can bet those boneheads from Vault City will shut down our power plant permanently. Vault City doesn't play nice. They'll just come up here and kill all of us if we don't get that part. Well, at least I'll have a tree for a monument.
So, Harold and the ghouls were trying to repair the damaged nuclear reactor, but in the process had accidentally poisoned the water supply. Vault City mistakenly thought they had done this on purpose and shot all ghouls on sight. But if a hydroelectric magnetosphere regulator wasn't installed soon, they would all have bigger things to worry about. Of course, the reactor could also be disabled, but this was their home. Humans hadn't been kind to ghouls, and after searching for somewhere to live, they found the plant, and the radiation, which they were immune to, kept them safe, as humans tended to avoid the stuff. So, on behalf of GECK, the Chosen One said they would return to Vault City and get the part for them, and Lenny, being the helpful soul that he was, decided to go with them. But the hospitality the Chosen One had experienced upon their first visit was now absent. Lenny was made to wait outside the city walls with guards watching his every move. It was clear they didn't trust them, and neither did Lynette, who refused to listen and didn't want to help GECK, even if it meant helping her own people. While walking back to Lenny to tell him the bad news, the Chosen One was approached by McClure, the senior council member. He saw the wisdom in repairing the plant and sent word to Randall, the chief amenities officer, to have the part ready for collection. By this point, Lenny had grown impatient. The guards' weapons, perhaps subconsciously, always seemed to be pointing towards him, and then the gate opened and the Chosen One stepped out, holding a package with a big smile on their face. Festus, the plant manager, was called to the office and after a few words of encouragement, took the package away. Shortly after, the lights flickered just that little bit brighter. Satisfied with how things were, the Chosen One thanked Lenny for his help and turned to leave. But Harold called out to them and said that while things were better, there was still something he needed to ensure. He knew that Vault City was expanding, and the power plant, now fully functional, had just become a major target. And knowing that Vault City used servants, glorified slaves, as part of their workforce, he suspected that if some sort of deal wasn't in place, then Vault City would one day take the plant by force and add the ghouls to their growing list of involuntary laborers. Knowing Lynette would never listen, the Chosen One returned to McClure, while Lenny was once again made to wait outside. Only this time, he decided to put a little more distance between himself and the guards. It was agreed that if GECK sent power to Vault City, then Vault City would send them medical supplies, a deal Lenny knew Harold would accept and return to give him the good news, while the Chosen One told Lynette that her problem was fixed, and while it wasn't exactly the solution she had been hoping for, her people were safe, and that should be all that mattered. With citizenship granted, they left Lynette to mull over the outcome and went to investigate Vault 8. This was their first time inside a vault, and it was incredible. With its thick metal walls, bright lights, and brilliant computers, it was weird to think that people ever wanted to leave. And after scouring through the central computer, they found the location of another vault. However, it wasn't the vault they were hoping for, but this vault was sealed with a GECK, and if it hadn't been used to make another settlement like Vault City, then it could be used to save Arroyo. So after refilling their supplies, they said farewell to Vault City and headed south into the desert. On August 30, 2241, the Chosen One had been traveling south towards Vault 15 for several days when they came across some people in the wrong place at the wrong time. On the left was a family, and on the right were 3 soldiers, one of which could only be described as a mountain. The largest soldier told the family they were going to go with him, but the father refused, as he only wanted to be left alone, saying he would never support the cause of their superiors. In response, the mountain issued a second and final warning, telling him again that if they did not come with him, he and his family would be made an example of. But the father was unwilling to listen and refused to comply, instead telling the soldier that he would rather his knowledge die with him, a request the mountain was happy to provide. In a brief but brutal moment, the family was cut down using machines that spat fire, and then the mountain turned to the Chosen One and warned them that what they had witnessed was none of their business and to forget what they had seen. They stood there, frozen in place, as the soldiers disappeared into the desert. Only after had they faded from view did they find their legs could move, and without thinking, they continued south. But that man would haunt their dreams for weeks to come. Closer to Vault 15, they stumbled upon one of the towns Ed had mentioned, Broken Hills, where they only intended to replenish their supplies before moving on. It was here they met Marcus, a super mutant from the Master's army, who had since become the unlikely leader and sheriff of the town, whose people were a rare combination of mutants and humans. The town's formative years were spent clinging to life, but after a particularly harsh winter, Marcus was now looking to restore the pre-war uranium mine and bring commerce to the town, wanting to build a safe haven for the desperate dregs of humanity. And after hearing about such a noble cause and believing their quest was almost over, the Chosen One decided to help in whatever way they could. But this help would take them to places they had never imagined, for it had them collecting parts from Renesco in New Reno. It's tricky figuring out which crime family they decided to work with, but Fallout New Vegas suggests two families came to power, the Bishops and the Wrights, meaning their actions in some way helped those two families while hindering the Salvatores and the Mordinos. And oddly enough, one of New Reno's endings has the Chosen One potentially fathering a child with either Leslie Ann Bishop or her daughter Angela Bishop.
Not long after the destruction of the Enclave, the Bishop family of New Reno was blessed with a child. This child seemed to have little in common with the Bishops, preferring instead to spend his days exploring the wastes. When he turned 13, he seized control of the Bishop family and led them to victory over the remaining New Reno families. He died quietly in his sleep at the age of 73, never having known his real father.
Now, while New Vegas establishes this ending as canon, as Bruce Isaac tells the Courier all about the Bishop child, their father is still unknown, and as such, the Chosen One's gender is still ambiguous and will remain that way for the rest of the video. But after helping these two families and getting the parts for the mine's air purifier, Broken Hills could now focus on becoming the town Marcus dreamed of. Or at least that's what the Chosen One thought. In their absence, several people had gone missing, and now rumors of an anti-mutant conspiracy were circulating the streets, something Marcus was genuinely afraid of, as he knew firsthand just how far some humans would go to rid the world of super mutants, and seeing it once was enough to last a lifetime. Knowing the Chosen One was someone he could trust, he pleaded with them to find the missing people and figure out if the rumors were true, and still thinking their quest was almost over, they agreed. And besides, the money Marcus had promised to pay them was more than enough to cover the expenses needed to get to Vault 15 and then back to Arroyo. Taking to the streets, they started with the families of those who were missing. But after asking them questions, which didn't tell them anything Marcus hadn't already, they went to the toilet, and while using a nearby outhouse, they stepped inside and found the manhole cover was suspiciously loose. Pulling the cover aside and climbing down, they didn't expect to find anything unusual. But at the end of a secret tunnel system, there were several bodies and a note. With this, the Chosen One had a few names: Zaius and Francis, two super mutants, and Jacob, the chemist, who according to the author of the note, was the leader of the anti-mutant conspiracy. But this note could have been left by anyone, so they investigated further, starting with Francis. Francis told them that there were people in the town trying to kill mutants. And while Marcus wasn't going to do anything about it, he, without Zaius, who was merely keeping Francis from going full berserk, killed the people he believed were trying to kill him, and then he used their bodies to serve another purpose, one that might further the cause of peace. But knowing that Marcus would one day find out the truth, Francis offered to leave the town and find a way to atone for his actions. Which wasn't justice, but it did remove him from the picture, while the Chosen One was left to figure out if Jacob really was the leader of the conspiracy, or just another innocent caught in the crossfire. Downtown, the Chosen One found Jacob with his wife Eileen, and they were welcoming and told them how the town came to be found by another man named Jacob, a Brotherhood knight and friend of Marcus. After the town was considered safe, Jacob went elsewhere, while Marcus became their leader, and while the town may look civilized, it was actually a killing ground for the bloodthirsty mutants, and the longer time went on, the less humans there were in Broken Hills. And then something happened. Jacob tried to recruit them. He told them they looked tough and could probably take down a mutant if they tried. He said he had some friends, Manson and Frank, who were in jail and needed help getting them out. If that didn't take their fancy, then he also needed chemicals, because he and his wife hated mutants and wanted to kill them, and the best way to get rid of them was to disable the mine's air purifier while they were inside. Before things could go too far, the Chosen One excused themselves, thanked Jacob and Eileen for their hospitality, and left. And I imagine, at this point, the Chosen One was feeling quite conflicted. On one hand, you had humans who felt threatened by the mutants and wanted them gone, and on the other hand, you had mutants who felt threatened by humans and wanted them gone. But Francis had left, Zaius wasn't a bad mutant, and Marcus genuinely wanted everyone to be safe. Only Jacob and his conspirators were left to cause the town more harm. And so they returned to Marcus and told him they had found the missing people dead beneath the town, and the anti-mutant conspiracy wasn't just a rumor, that Jacob was the one in charge and he wanted to blow up the mine to kill the mutants. Marcus was dumbfounded. He had wanted to build something great, but still mutants and humans were killing each other. Would the two groups ever be allowed to coexist? He didn't know, but he could worry about that later. For now, he and his deputies would take it from here, and once the conspirators were behind bars, he would inform the families the missing people had been found. He then paid the Chosen One and said that if they ever needed help saving their village, he would join them, and then he left to put an end to the conspiracy. The Chosen One watched as Jacob, Eileen, along with several other conspirators, were all taken to jail. And then they asked Marcus if he was serious about joining them, which he was. Marcus was incredibly grateful to see the town safe and wanted to return the favor. So they set off together, heading south to Vault 15.
Chosen, the spirits of our ancestors guide me to a world of dreams that I may touch thoughts. Our village suffers without the holy GECK. Your hands hold our lives as a father holds his children.
After another week or so of walking through the desert, and one dream later, the Chosen One and Marcus stood outside the vault. Although instead of being able to find a GECK or even access the vault's central computer and find another vault, their way forward was blocked by a group of squatters. These squatters had taken up refuge outside the vault after the NCR had taken their land, and now they were searching for a place to call their own, a home where the outside world, with all of its strife and problems, would leave them be. And the sight of two more outsiders, one of which was a super mutant, didn't exactly put them in a talkative mood. But there was a woman, Rebecca. She looked around as if she was being watched and told them that they shouldn't talk here and asked if they could go somewhere more private. Inside her tent, she told them Chrissy, her daughter, a tomboy of sorts who likes to run around and stick her nose into other people's business, had been missing for several days. While Rebecca has tried to find her daughter, Zeke, the mayor, told her to stop looking as it wasn't safe and sent some of his men to find her instead. Yet even they came back empty-handed and suggested that Chrissy was most likely taken by slavers. The Chosen One and Marcus exchanged glances and knew that if they were going to get inside Vault 15, then this was their first step in doing so. So they told Rebecca they would take a look around and see what they could find. Now the last place Chrissy was seen was heading up the small dirt path on the right side of the vault door, so that's where they went first. But after reaching the top and finding no signs of foul play, they were passed by a man who blatantly ignored them. Following the stranger led to a small shack where a woman, who after a brief exchange with the stranger, stepped aside. Approaching, the woman stuck out her hand and with a confused expression waited for them to do something. But when they started asking questions, she dropped her hand and said she didn't give a rat's ass if a girl was missing. She was just a hired gun who guards the trail. Other than that, she didn't really know what went on around here. Although some guy had gone by, he knew the proper sign. If they didn't, then they needed to leave. Unless they wanted trouble. Not wanting to stir things up, they returned to the squatters' camp and told Rebecca that something strange was going on at the top of the trail, and they would take another look once it was dark. Once day had faded, they crept back up the trail, but just as before, the woman was standing guard. Without the proper sign, she wouldn't let them pass, so they would have to try something else. Dahlia was staring down the trail when the mutant from before walked up to her and started asking questions. She could feel herself reaching for a gun, but then the world jolted to the side, and the last bit of light she could see went black. Behind her was the Chosen One with a very large rock, and now without the guard, they turned their attention towards the small shack. Of course, the door was locked, but after rummaging through the guard's pockets, they found a key. With it, the door swung open, and they found themselves staring down the barrel of a gun. On the other end was a man wearing metal armor who said, "I should shoot you dead, but I'm kind of curious about what you could possibly have to say to me." The man was Phil, a Khan raider, who not only knew where Chrissy was, but had also been keeping an eye on Rebecca to make sure she didn't get too close. They told him that in the time it took him to kill one of them, the other would have returned the favor. Phil turned towards the mutant, who in the dark night was holding something very large that had a faint scent of spent gunpowder. The Khan slowly nodded and came to terms with the fact that the Chosen One was probably right. His only way out of this alive would be to give them what they wanted, and so he dropped his weapon, held out a key, and told them the girl was in the back room, and then he tried to leave, which only ended with him joining Dahlia in the land of sleep. Inside the shack, behind the door in the corner, the girl was borderline rabid until they told her that they were there to take her back to her mother, who was very worried and just outside waiting. Rebecca told the Chosen One everything her daughter had learned during her time in captivity, that Darian, the man who was helping them, was actually a raider, and his group, the New Khans, had been using the squatters to protect themselves from the NCR. And even though Zeke, the mayor, did seem a little suspicious, Rebecca still trusted him enough to suggest taking the bad news to him. In the beginning, when the squatters were forced from their home by the NCR, they had found Vault 15 in disrepair and had tried their very best to restore it to working order. They were unable to, and then Darian and his raiders came along and said they could fix the vault for them. With their help, they wouldn't have to worry about the NCR ever again, which sounded too good to be true, because it was. Darian took control of the vault, and while the raiders pretended to fix it, they snuck out and attacked NCR caravans, and whatever loot, water, food and medicine that survived the raid were given to the squatters, who believed the supplies were coming from the vault, and so they were more than happy to live outside while Darian restored their new home. Zeke couldn't believe what he was hearing. By working with the raiders, he had been helping them hide their operations, and was now, unwillingly, Darian's accomplice, and the crimes the New Khans had committed were now his own, which would only make things between themselves and the NCR all the more difficult, but something needed to be done. The squatters were in no shape to fight the raiders. Even with the Chosen One and Marcus, who were capable fighters, there were just too many Khans to simply gun down, and they didn't have enough money to buy mercenaries, which left only one group who could help, someone the squatters really wanted to avoid, the NCR. Now the NCR knew about Vault 15 because it's where their ancestors came from, and as of late they have made many visits to the vault, wanting any technology that may still be inside. But without anywhere else to go, the squatters have had no choice but to rely on the raiders. But now things were different, and if the NCR wanted access to the vault, then maybe they could work together and both come out on top, and with the raiders out of the way, the Chosen One could get inside and find a GECK. But after heading west to NCR, everything changed. They learned from Tandy, Aradesh's daughter, who founded the town, formerly known as Shady Sands, had done so with a GECK, the only one Vault 15 had, meaning their quest was now far from over, unless the central computer could direct them to another vault. But for that to happen, Darian needed to go. So after explaining to Tandy that the raiders inside the vault had been attacking their caravans, something the squatters were unaware of and were merely being used by the Khans to repel the NCR, suggested that in return for whatever technology they wanted from the vault, the squatters would be allowed to make it their new home. The deal was a no-brainer for Tandy. With it, the raiders would be killed, making the road safer. Her caravans would no longer be raided, at least by Khans, and she could also get access to the vault and take whatever she wanted. It was a win-win-win for Tandy. She agreed. On the conditions, the Chosen One killed Darian and the squatters joined the Republic. The Chosen One brought Tandy's deal to Zeke, who was understandably unhappy about joining the NCR, but he did understand that if Darian was killed, then the vault would be their new home, which would put them in a much better position to bargain with Tandy if things went south. Sensing that the Chosen One may actually be able to pull this off, Zeke said that Chrissy had seen a hidden door beside the shack. He then pulled out a red card and told them that he had tried using it on every other door he's found, and none of them opened, so perhaps it would open that door. Yes, it was a long shot, but it was the only one they had. Taking the card, they left Zeke and went back up the dirt trail for the third time. At the top, Dahlia was missing, but Phil was still there, and he was no longer breathing, having most likely died from his head wound. But beside Phil, between the small group of trees, was a door they had missed, having been preoccupied the last time they were here. It was a secret entrance the Khans had been using to bypass the squatters, and the card Zeke had given them, as he'd hoped, granted them access. Below ground, the Chosen One was immediately halted in their tracks by a guard, whose only qualm was they did not recognize them. But then they remembered something, that Darian had a lot of hired guns and new people were always joining, and a hardened tribal and super mutant with a minigun fit right in, and so they pretended they were mercenaries. And upon seeing no issues, the guard let them through, and beyond that, no Khan or Merc ever questioned them, only watched in awe and stepped aside when the mutant got too close. And this ruse lasted all the way to the control room where Darian was hiding. Darian was an older man with thin grey hair, but still in good shape for his age. A surprising sight, considering he was almost 100 years old. But two things had kept him going all these years: hate and fear. His hate for Tandy, who he blames for all of his problems and misery in life, and his fear of the Vault Dweller, who killed his father, Garl Deathhand, along with every other Khan raider while rescuing Tandy. A massacre only he survived, and for 80 years, Darian has plotted his revenge, slowly building his gang of new Khans, although most of his power comes from the many mercs he pays to stick around. And here they were, huddled around their cash cow, intent on keeping him alive. But all it took was a well-placed bullet, assisted by Vats, for the mercenaries to realize their employer was now dead. And without Darian paying them, the entire operation fell apart. Mercenaries fought to the death over what was left. Only those new Khans raiding at the time survived, and when they returned, Vault 15 was a very different place. With Darian dead, and the last few remaining mercs running for the exit, the Chosen One, watched over by Marcus, scoured the information on the central computer. And to their surprise, there was another vault only a few days west from NCR, and this vault was special, because it was the fabled Holy Vault 13, and if any vault would have a GECK they could use to save their village, it would be this one. A few days after telling Tandy the good news that Darian was dead and the squatters were joining the Republic, they found themselves at Vault 13. But they didn't find raiders, or squatters, or even Vault Dwellers, but intelligent Deathclaws, who lo and behold were not only friendly, but also had a GECK they could have. The only catch was before they could have it, they needed to repair the mainframe computer. You see, After the Vault Dweller was exiled from Vault 13 by Jacoran, the Overseer, a decision the other Dwellers didn't agree with, he was stripped of his position and sentenced to death. The rebellious Dwellers then either left the Vault in search of their savior or stayed behind. Those remaining Dwellers disliked the idea of having another Overseer, so instead, they had a mainframe computer installed by the Brotherhood of Steel that could be interacted with through voice commands. And while this did make their lives much easier for 3 generations, it had no way of helping them with what came next. On May 15, 2241, the Vault received a coded sequence which told the central computer that it was finally time to leave the Vault. Martin Frobisher, the Vault's informal leader, ran the Dwellers through the emergence protocol. The Leaving the Vault training video provided by Vault-Tec was played, and all other preparations were complete. A day later, on May 16, the Vault door opened. Within minutes, the Vault had been transformed from a safe haven into a combat zone. Many Dwellers were decimated by the deceitful demons. A GECK was stolen, while the other was left behind. And then, oddly enough, animal handlers filled the Vault with intelligent Deathclaws, whose sole purpose was to take the fall for the massacre. But these Deathclaws, genetically engineered to serve, questioned the morality of their evil overlords and severed all ties, turning the now empty Vault into their new home. The pack, under the leadership of Gruther, started a new community. Using the voice recognition on the mainframe, he was able to provide his pack with water, food, and a new purpose. These supplies, and a home inside the Vault, was extended to humans as a sort of penance for what the Enclave had done. The Vault became a unique place where Deathclaws and humans could coexist. Even Dahlia, after her run-in with the Chosen One, would find her way here. But this relationship was strained by a man named Matt, who believed the Deathclaws were the greatest threat to humanity and bombed the Mother Deathclaw and her brood. While the Deathclaws survived the attack, the mainframe was damaged and the Deathclaws were no longer able to receive food and water, which forced them outside in search of supplies. Water was easy to find as radioactive puddles were abundant, but the only source of food they could find were livestock and NCR Brahmin herds, which Gruther and many other Deathclaws knew would one day bring trouble. And that's how things were, up until the Chosen One came along searching for a GECK, and Gruther jumped at the opportunity to get the mainframe repaired and return the pack toward a more peaceful way of living. There are 2 ways the Chosen One could have gathered a Vault-Tec voice recognition module, either buying one from Eldritch in New Reno or taking one from Vault 8. Either way, it was easily recovered, and after repairing the mainframe, they were given the GECK as promised. And it wasn't broken, it wasn't fake, and despite feeling like Vault 13 had been far too easy, they could finally return to Arroyo and save their village. And then Gruther gave them some food and water for their travels, and said if there was anything else inside the Vault they wanted, within reason, they could have. After looking around, they found themselves drawn to a strange piece of tech. It didn't work on its own, but it was interesting to look at, and would surely make a nice gift back home. Before they could leave, a hooded figure started asking questions. He introduced himself as Goris and wanted to know more about them, having heard from Gruther, his father, that they were well seasoned, having been around a bit and accomplished things. Goris explained that he was a student of sorts and was trying to learn as much as he could about the old world and the different cultures that have developed. Right now, he was studying the culture the Deathclaws were forming and comparing it to human development along similar lines. He's acquired just about all the information he needs here, and it would greatly help his research if he could do some traveling. However, he didn't want to go alone, instead preferring a joint venture. Turning to Marcus, the mutant shrugged, and Goris took his gesture as a yes. Together, the trio of oddballs put Vault 13 behind them and started walking north. Over the coming days, the Chosen One learned many things from Goris about the Enclave and a virus, FEV, a virus known to mutate humans into some sort of super beings, something Marcus confirmed to be true, having once been one of those humans. It was during one of these discussions where Goris stopped talking and stood up with an expression that radiated both concern and discomfort. He said he could sense that his pack were in trouble and he needed to check on his brothers. The Chosen One, having only traveled a few days from Vault 13, decided to go with him. When they arrived at Vault 13, Goris felt as if he had somehow been transported through time back to the massacre. Only now, instead of Vault Dwellers, it was Deathclaws and Wastelanders that littered the ground like discarded toys. The Chosen One and Marcus followed quietly as Goris checked on every corpse he came across, but no life was left in Vault 13, and neither was the body of Gruther, which gave him hope that his father had survived. In the command center, they learned the security cameras had recorded the events, and on the screen was Gruther. A Deathclaw lay off to his side, still as stone, and surrounding the pack leader were 6 Enclave soldiers, one of which the Chosen One recognized immediately. It was the same man they had encountered in the desert, and knowing just how brutal he could be, they feared for Gruther's life. The mountain spoke and told Gruther that he was the last, and the stain of his kind would soon be wiped clean. Gruther replied and told the mountain that they could tell their so-called president that he would burn for this. But these words meant nothing to the mountain, who saw Gruther as nothing more than a talking animal, and if their experiments had given him life, then that also meant he could take it away. Instead of ordering his men to shoot Gruther, he stepped forward, killed him with a single punch, and then took his body away to be studied. The Chosen One and Marcus waited outside for Goris, and once he was ready, they left Vault 13 with 2 goals: to get the GECK to Arroyo and then find the mountain and make him pay.
Chosen, do you hear me? The village dies. All of our futures die too. We have little left in both time and essence. Hurry.
Arroyo was running out of time, and no longer could they afford the luxury of sleep. It would bring them to the brink of exhaustion, but they made it to Arroyo as quickly as they could, which still took several days. At Arroyo, what they found wasn't a starving village with hopeful smiles, but smoke and fire and death and a badly burned Hakunin whose spirit had returned to tell the Chosen One what had happened.
Dark souls came. They took everyone. A rush of wind came. On it were great dragonflies that spat flame. Evil men crawled from the beasts' bellies and brought death to our warriors. The spirit was willing, but the spearheads were weak. The evil ones burned our warriors with the lights of hell. All were dead or taken. My spirit returned to flesh only to reveal the truth to the Chosen. A strange mist stole their minds and sent them to the land of sleep. The evil ones walked among the dreamers, yet did not dream. The beasts swallowed all, then took to the winds. I overheard the dark soul speaking. They planned to rest their beasts at a place named Navarro before crossing the great basin of our Earth Mother's tears. An ocean of tears cried by a mother for her children.
You are the Chosen. You must do
Following the coastline south for just over 2 weeks, the trio noted that they had started to see more and more signs of the Enclave. The occasional wastelander, half-cooked with scorch marks that matched Hakunin's, tracks spread out as if whoever left them were patrolling. And then they heard this awful sound, a deep rumbling that shook their minds from the inside, and it sounded like it was getting closer. It was one of the dragonflies Hakunin had mentioned. To the Chosen One, it looked more like a giant metal bird. Either way, it could kill an entire village with ease. So they waited and watched as it flew into the distance. But before it disappeared, it stopped, and as if stuck in place, hovered momentarily before landing somewhere out of view. Heading in that direction, a day later, they came to a small building at the edge of the road. After watching it for some time, they counted only a single inhabitant, and they were not wearing power armor or looked official in any way. But just in case they were in some way working with the Enclave, it was best to go alone. After all, a super mutant and talking Deathclaw were bound to look suspicious, so they remained out of sight while the Chosen One went to see who this person was. His name was Chris. The building was a pre-war service station, and as far as he knew, there wasn't anything around here except for wasteland and radiation. But there was civilization further south, so they should probably go that way instead of standing around here. This comment was awfully strange. It was almost as if Chris was trying to get rid of them. After a few moments of awkward silence, he tried again, and this time he told them to head to the back of the gas station and to go through the small group of trees, where, on the other side, they might find something interesting. And now they were certain something was off, so they tried a different approach. They mentioned the Enclave, Navarro, and metal birds, and lied about wanting to join. Chris only stared with a blank expression, and one of his hands seemed to be reaching for something, perhaps a radio or a gun. But then he sighed with relief and clapped them on the shoulder. He walked them to the back of the gas station while telling them he hadn't expected the Enclave replacement to get here so soon. He apologized for the hassle and then pointed them towards the woods and said to go through, that there was a gate on the other side where a guard would need a password, sheep's head, and not to forget to stay on the path unless they wanted to get blown up by mines. And then he walked away, chuckling the words metal bird as he went. With Chris out of sight, they turned their attention towards the small group of trees, and with some effort, they could just about make out the path he had mentioned. But he had also said something about mines. With every step, they waited to be launched into the air, only to come back down in bits and pieces. But after making it through intact, they were surprised to see the gate and the guard, along with turrets, a large fence topped with barbed wire, and 2 more guards, who weren't at all surprised to see them. One password later, they were walking down the road towards Navarro, still unsure as to whether or not this was a trap. That was until they met Sergeant Dornan.
Welcome to Camp Navarro. So you're the new replacement. You are out of uniform, soldier! Where is your power armor? Don't have any? You expect me to believe that, maggot? The truth is, you lost an expensive piece of Army-issue equipment. That suit is going to come out of your pay, and you will remain in this man's army until you are 510 years old, which is the number of years it will take for you to pay for a Mark II powered combat armor you have lost. Report to the armory and have a new suit issued to you, then report back to me, Private! Dismissed!
After entering the first building, they were directed to a small ladder that led underground to a much larger complex, and following the signs for the armory, they found themselves standing in a long, thin room with several lockers, one of which was open, and inside was a suit of power armor and a Winchester P94 plasma rifle, the perfect pairing for the perfect disguise. Exiting the armory, to their left was another ladder leading outside. On the right were more signs for the commander's office and the science lab. Of the two, the science lab sounded the most promising. But inside, all they found was a balding man in a lab coat and a dog that, while breathing, didn't move. Talking to the man, whose name was Dr. Schreiber, they learned many things. That he was the base physician, but more of a geneticist. This was his lab, where he conducted experiments that usually held subjects who would insist on screaming, which is why the lab was soundproofed. The talking deathclaws were his doing, although he suspects they were far more intelligent than they were letting on, and the one they had captured from Vault 13 had been deemed too dangerous to be left alive, and was scheduled for termination. Then the doctor saw the plasma rifle and suggested they do it for him, as his hands were already full and the extra help would be appreciated, as his current assistant wasn't much use, indicating the dog in the corner, which was an odd thing to see, but still not the strangest thing they'd encountered on their quest. Hoping their tribe, along with the doomed Deathclaw, were being held in some sort of prison cell, agreed to help the doctor put down the abomination. Down the corridor, inside the room, was only a single Deathclaw, who introduced himself as Zahn. Removing their helmet, Zahn's defeated face smirked. He recognized the Chosen One from Vault 13, who said that Goris was alive and just outside, along with Marcus, and while they had come searching for their tribe, which Zahn had not seen, they wouldn't leave without him. Zahn explained to the Chosen One that when he was brought here, he was done so through the door behind him, and that door led to a secret entrance just outside the base. Now, brute force wasn't enough to break the door open. Instead, a blue key pass would be needed, something Zahn knew the doctor had. So, the Chosen One returned to the science lab to find it, but when they went inside, they were stopped in their tracks by Dr. Schreiber, who was teasing the statue-like dog. This was K9, his assistant. Schreiber had decided to see if he could cyber-enhance his intelligence, which worked, but the dog had developed a bad case of morals and decided he didn't much like the doctor's work, and one day he bit Dr. Schreiber. As punishment, Schreiber disabled his legs. Now he gets to sit there and watch every distasteful thing he does. The Chosen One felt sorry for K9 and asked if he could be fixed, which the doctor replied with a resounding yes. His motivator circuit had been removed and given to Raoul, Navarro's vertibird mechanic, and even though it was taken out, it could be put back in. Something the doctor intended to do one day, just to see if K9 had changed his mind. But something told the Chosen One that this dog would never come to like the doctor or any of the horrible things he would do. Then they stood up, said they were patrolling soon and needed to get ready, but would come back later to see if there was anything else the doctor needed help with. Outside, they made their way to the vertibird hangar, where an angry voice came from a man wearing a filthy military uniform, and judging by the grease spots on his face, he was Raoul. And in a voice both angry and tired, he told them to get away from that bird, as he's got enough problems to deal with without the grunts mucking things up. Speechless, the Chosen One stepped back and said the doctor wanted to fix K9. While protesting about this and that, and some asshat named Quincy found the part and threw it to them. Outside the hangar, they heard a lot more noise coming from the building next door. It was a garage of sorts, where another mechanic was cursing to himself, and the closer they got, the more they heard. Something about repairing a truck, vertibirds, and Raoul. Whatever was going on between these two mechanics wasn't good, and as soon as he saw the Chosen One, they said, without thinking, that Raoul wanted something, which was a blatant lie, but redirecting the man's anger was probably a good thing, because Quincy was furious. He said Raoul would lose his own head if it weren't placed so firmly up his ass, and that this would be the third time this quarter he's lost those plans, and now he didn't even have the brass bouncing balls to come to him and ask for them. With a greasy finger, Quincy pointed to a locker at the back of the garage and told the Chosen One to tell that asshole he wanted to see him. Inside the locker were vertibird plans. They didn't know who these were more valuable to, the Enclave or some other tech-obsessed group, but they were valuable to say the least, and having been given the opportunity to take them, they did. Leaving the garage, they returned to the vertibird hangar, and while Raoul was angrily inspecting the bird, quietly told him that Quincy wanted to see him. As the Chosen One descended the ladder, they listened as Raoul stormed past and went into the garage. There was shouting, followed by the unmistakable noise of two men fighting, and while the Chosen One wasn't certain, they thought they could hear the sound of Sergeant Dornan shouting in the distance, and he didn't sound pleased. Back at the lab, the doctor was once again teasing K9, and then he turned to the Chosen One with a puzzled expression that said there was no way they could have been on patrol that fast. But without saying a single word, the Chosen One turned to K9, and seeing a slot that roughly matched the outline of the motivator, paired them together. Before Schreiber had the time to react, K9 was on top of him, tearing out his throat. If not for the soundproofed lab, his deafening screams would have been heard by Chris, let alone the guards outside. K9 turned to the Chosen One, muzzle still wet and snarling. They raised the plasma rifle ever so slightly, preparing to fight. But the mad dog's breathing slowed, and then he thanked them and said that his life had been a living nightmare, and he'd been wanting to do that for quite some time. K9 was already heading for the door when they were stopped by the Chosen One, who said he wasn't the only one who needed saving, and Zahn, the talking Deathclaw, still needed help. K9 looked torn between saving his own hide and helping the stranger when his morals took over. Searching the doctor's desk, the Chosen One found a blue card, much like the red one Zeke had given them back at Vault 15, and with it, the other door to Zahn's room was opened. But their faces changed when the Chosen One said they weren't going with them, as they didn't know where their tribe had been taken and couldn't leave Navarro until they did. Expecting them to run off to safety, they started for the corridor, but were surprised to hear the sounds of their footsteps. They were following, and they wanted to help. The Chosen One, K9, and Zahn went to the only place left that made any sense, the commander's office. Suffice to say, the three soldiers along the way were no match and were swiftly cut down, either being torn in half by Zahn's razor-sharp claws or turned into piles of green goo by the plasma rifle. Inside the office, the commander experienced a similar fate, but unfortunately, they found no trace of their tribe and no information on them either. In fact, the only locked container in the room, which Zahn broke open, held only a fob. K9 suggested it could have digital information and should be taken just in case, but now they needed to leave, because for some reason the alarm had been sounded. Had the real Enclave replacement shown up for duty? Did Raoul and Quincy realize the vertibird plans had been stolen, or had the doctor's body been discovered? Whatever the reason, they left through the hidden exit and were glad to be on the other side of the fence. After a brief moment of respite, Goris told Zahn to wait for him at Vault 13. Without Gruther, Goris was now the pack leader, and Zahn did as he was told. Marcus and K9 exchanged a few words, while the Chosen One was lost as to where to go next. That was until K9 told them the Enclave had enemies south, and remembering Chris had said something about there being civilization in that direction, decided that somewhere in all this wasteland would be someone who could help them. After weeks of hiding from vertibirds and crossing paths with Enclave patrols, some they avoided, others they killed, they found their way to San Francisco, a genuine city, or at least what was left of one. It is here the ambiguity ramps up, as we don't know who the Chosen One gave the vertibird plans to. They could have given them to the Brotherhood of Steel, or the She, or the Hubologists, and then stolen them back and returned them to one of the others. We just don't know. But what we do know is that the Chosen One was able to learn from the She Emperor, a powerful naval computer which had been monitoring the Enclave's activity, that there was a 97% aggregate chance the Chosen One's tribe had been taken to a location in the Pacific Ocean. I imagine the Chosen One considered taking a vertibird from Navarro, but that came with a whole host of problems, making it the most likely to go wrong, and it would still be years before the group they gave the plans to would have their own working vertibird, and by then, their tribe would be long dead. Alternatively, there was the ESS Quetzal, a nuclear-powered shuttle, but the chances of finding someone to fly it, finding a place to land, and it not blowing up on takeoff was extremely unlikely. So instead, they went to San Fran's Shetown docks and started searching for a ship, and it's here they found the Private Marine Vessel, or PMV Valdez. Investigating the tanker, the odd group of Tribal, Mutant, Deathclaw, and Cyberdog met the self-styled captain, Aaron Myers, who after seeing the group, knew there was no way in hell they were Enclave spies, and revealed that he was a deserter from Navarro, and due to his unique position, he wanted to help. Myers knew full well that unless the Enclave was stopped, he would never be able to live a normal life, because, as the family in the desert and the talking Deathclaws learned, the Enclave doesn't forget, and no matter how far you run or how well you hide, they will always find you in the end. So after reviewing the coordinates from the She-Emperor, he confirmed that the location was a pre-war Poseidon energy oil rig, now known as Control Station Enclave. It was their main base of operations, and the Valdez was the perfect ship to get them there, because the Valdez was completely autonomous, meaning it could sail without a crew, but there were still a few things it needed before it could work. The first thing the ship needed was an identification friend or foe, or IFF transponder, a device that would trick the Enclave systems into thinking the vessel was friendly, which the Chosen One, at the behest of K9, had taken from the commander's office in Navarro. The next thing the ship needed was the navcom parts for the navigation system, which Myers explained had been taken by the Enclave to Vault 13, the same part Gruther had allowed the Chosen One to have. Meaning the third and final thing the ship needed was fuel, which either the She or the Hubologists could have provided, and while we don't know which group they decided to work with, we do know that one of them diverted fuel to the Valdez, after which the only thing left to do was set sail. Marcus, Goris, and K9 agreed that staying on the ship was probably their best chance of remaining undetected, while the Chosen One, with their power armor and plasma rifle, went aboard and blended in with the other soldiers. The outside platform, with its faces, reminded the Chosen One of the Temple of Trials, and just how far their quest had taken them. The people they had met, the things they had done, had all led to this moment, and if all went well, it would soon be over. Inside, they crossed the entrance hall and took the elevator down to a lower floor, where they found themselves surrounded by tribals from Arroyo and Vault Dwellers from Vault 13, all trapped behind obscure walls of light. And while walking through the rows of captives, trying to think of a way to save them, they found their mother, the village elder.
Chosen One, men came to our village in flying machines and took us. There were others too, from the Holy 13. I thought we were saved. I thought we were going to heaven. Then they brought us here, to hell. They have killed most of us with something they call FEV. They will kill us all before they are through. They stick needles into our skin like stim packs. But then terrible things happen. Then the skin bubbles like maggots beneath it. Boils grow and burst. Blood runs from your ears and your tongue swells. Those who are lucky choke to death. Those who are not. Careful, do not touch the glow wall. I think the machine that feeds it is beneath us. You must destroy the machine and kill the devils in this place. We will meet you outside. And Chosen One, if you have not found the GECK, seek it here. Our freedom is nothing if we cannot save our village. Now go.
With a goal in mind, to destroy the machine and kill the devils, the Chosen One rode another elevator down and found a strange room, a 3x3 grid. Inside each segment was a computer that randomly opened some doors while closing others. It was a room used to slow down intruders, and it was working. Nevertheless, it was only a matter of time until they passed through enough doors to reach the exit, as well as 2 other rooms, a break room and a storage room, which held a second GECK taken from Vault 13. Down another level, they walked through several offices and workplaces, jam-packed with Enclave soldiers, who all looked far too busy to take any notice of one slightly lost soldier. And I say lost because they accidentally entered into the wrong room, where a very tired man in a white lab coat demanded to know what they were doing inside his office. He started saying something about staying put while he called someone to take care of them, but stopped when he noticed the soldier's plasma rifle was pointing at him. He asked them who they were and what they wanted. The Chosen One told him that they were a tribal from Arroyo and they wanted answers. The doctor said his name was Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Charles Curling, United States Chemical Corps, and while he didn't see much point in talking to a mutant, as the real humans would soon retake the planet, he continued, knowing the longer he spoke, the more likely it was that someone would come and intervene. Curling said his research on the villagers clearly showed changes to their DNA, a natural result of all the background radiation, and while they may not look like mutants, it was their DNA that mattered, DNA that was quite different. Although he hadn't quite had the time to look into the ramifications of these changes. All in all though, the information was clear enough. The Chosen One and their tribe were no longer human, and the conclusion was unavoidable. That in order to retake the Earth and maintain integrity to the human race, all mutants would have to be destroyed. He said it was social Darwinism at its finest. The global cleansing would be done with the forced evolutionary virus, or FEV. One of their patrols had found the research data and several samples of FEV in a former military research base that had been almost completely destroyed. The virus was initially supposed to turn humans into super soldiers. That experiment was an utter failure, although Curling has had some success using a modified version of FEV on one of their Secret Service agents. And now the virus, thanks to his tweaking, was even more lethal, and due to some mysterious genius named the Master, it only worked on humans, bonding with human glycol proteins. Once it was released, it would spread from human to human until it ran out of hosts and died, leaving the Enclave with a clean slate to rebuild their new world. Something about the way the tribal was staring at him said he should keep talking, and so he went on. saying they had a release system that would spray the virus straight from the vats to the outside atmosphere, where the jet streams would take care of the rest. Global saturation would take only 2 weeks, with another month or so for the virus to run its course, and then the United States would be ready for recolonization by real humans. Perhaps it was a crime for so much life to be lost, but there was no price too high to pay for the survival of one species. The Chosen One thought about killing him, but there was a chance it would be too loud, and then they would never be able to reach the machine. But even if they did manage to free the villagers and dwellers, they would all be dead within 2 weeks. This quest was getting out of hand, and they didn't know if they would be able to finish it, when a word came to them from the depths of their troubled mind, a word the Doctor had used, Darwinism. It was a word they knew well from the knowledge passed down by the Vault Dweller, the theory of the evolution of species by natural selection. They told the Doctor that change was probably the one universal constant, and just because they were now different, that didn't make them bad. If anything, the tribals were living proof of humanity's resilience, and as such, they deserved to survive, even more than the Enclave. But the Doctor disagreed, and told the Chosen One that they were no more like him than a mutated two-headed cow is like a normal heifer, which was untrue. If mono-headed cows had existed, then they had long since died out. But the cow, as a species, has survived and grown even stronger, and the Chosen One told him this, and said again that change was an integral part of the natural order. And if Brahmin were just another type of cow, then tribals were just another type of human. The Doctor walked over to his desk, and after a long sigh, said that while he hated to admit it, perhaps he was wrong. What the Enclave were planning to do just wasn't right, and he had been blinded by trying to overcome the obstacles that he hadn't considered the morality of his task. With the Doctor now on his side, the Chosen One asked him if the virus could be destroyed, but that was pointless because the Enclave would just start over. Even with him dead, there was still enough data between here and Navarro to ensure they could replicate his work. Only something more drastic would be enough. He then told the Chosen One his plan. He was going to release the virus into the air filtration system, which would travel to all floors, and within minutes, everyone would die. However, in the event that something were to go wrong, Curling had made a cure to guarantee the Enclave would survive. This cure was now going to be repurposed and released into the detention center and entrance hall, ensuring the tribals, dwellers, and anyone else who left the Valdez would survive. And then the Doctor opened his desk and asked the Chosen One to come closer. When they had, he gave them a shot, his only cure, and said that this was the only way it would work. They couldn't release the cure on this floor because that would leave too many Enclave soldiers alive, and they couldn't just release the virus because that would lead to themselves also dying. But with this cure, the Chosen One would survive. After the Doctor was sure the cure had been sent to the right places, he released the virus, and while waiting to die, he recited William Blake's The Tiger, a poem that questioned Christian religious paradigms, discussing God's intentions and motivation for creating both the tiger and the lamb. His words slowly faded into nothing, and then he died. The Chosen One thanked Curling for his sacrifice and opened the office door, where on the other side, they were greeted by a gentle quietness. Stepping over the bodies, they took some dynamite from a nearby corpse and made their way to the final floor where the machine quietly whirred. They tried to switch it off, but the computer just wouldn't listen. Growing impatient, the Chosen One took the dynamite, set the timer, and blew up the computer. After the smoke had faded, two things happened. The force fields trapping their family were turned off, allowing them to escape to the Valdez, and on what little remained of the computer's screen, a counter with a warning appeared. It said that in 10 minutes the reactor would go into meltdown, and remembering what Harold had said about meltdowns being bad for everyone, they started running. The Chosen One rode the elevators back to the entrance hall, and were ready to be reunited with their family when they were stopped by a group of soldiers led by Sergeant Granite. Granite wanted to know why they weren't at their post, but all the Chosen One could say was they were tired and they wanted to go home. Something many soldiers understood, including Granite, and while he wouldn't stop them from deserting their post, he did say they wouldn't get very far, as Frank Horrigan was now waiting at the exit. According to Granite, Horrigan was some genetically engineered freak that used to be the president's bodyguard. Now he's more than half machine. He's tough, fast, and the things he likes to do to mutants is the stuff of nightmares. Sensing who was in the other room, the Chosen One gave Granite and his men an ultimatum. They could either stay here and wait for the meltdown, where they would surely die, or they could help kill Frank Horrigan and take the ship back to shore, where they could be with their families. The soldiers all knew that they were thinking the same thing, and after weighing up their odds of swimming back to shore, they abandoned their station and followed the Chosen One towards what they must have thought would be their last living moments, because Frank Horrigan was truly monstrous.
You've gotten a lot farther than you should have, but then you haven't met Frank Horrigan either. Making our reactor meltdown means that things are going to be pretty hot in here soon. Pity you won't live long enough to see it. You're not a hero. You're just a walking corpse. Your ride's over, Mutie. Time to die.
In the blink of an eye, the entrance hall became a battlefield, with Frank slicing the air with a giant knife the size of a normal human, and when that didn't work, he switched to a plasma cannon and fired haphazardly around the room, and while some soldiers were burned alive or cut in half, the Chosen One continued to avoid his attacks, which only angered Horrigan and fueled his burning rage. Alas, we don't know how the battle ended. The Chosen One may have gotten lucky and struck a vital component that brought Frank to a standstill, but I like to think that Goris, sensing the danger, came to the Chosen One's aid, and just as promised, avenged his fallen brothers by delivering the final blow. In the end, Horrigan would find himself on his knees, surrounded by everything he hated. Now dying, he clutched his chest, and while coughing blood, spoke his final words.
You haven't won here. You and your muty bastard friends are gonna join me in a big old mushroom cloud send-off. I just triggered the self-destruct. The work will go on. You didn't do nothing here except seal your own death warrants. Duty. Honor. Courage. Semper Fi.
Back on solid ground, Sergeant Granite, along with those who weren't killed by Horrigan, went north to Navarro and were never heard of again, but some say they lived a life full of adventure. Marcus, inspired by the Chosen One's example, went back to Broken Hills, but once the uranium mine dried up and the population dispersed, he continued heading east. It is said that while Marcus never heard from the Chosen One again, he felt that everything worked out for them in the end. Goris returned to Zaan, and together they disappeared. Some say they died, others believe they continued their species and made a new pack, following the peaceful ways Gruther had always taught. K9 was taken and left in NCR with Dorothy, but it was here he was disassembled because the NCR wanted to learn what made him tick. During this process, K9 would draw his last breath, but not all was lost, as the NCR did learn the location of Navarro and destroyed the base, something I'm sure K9 would have willingly given his life for, had they only asked. As for the Chosen One, they guided their tribe and the dwellers from Vault 13 back to Arroyo, and with the GECK they founded the city of New Arroyo, reuniting the two bloodlines that had been separated for 3 generations. The village elder, pleased with the reunion, found peace and passed away a few months later. With the combination of the Vault Dwellers' technical know-how and the tribal's survival skills, New Arroyo thrived under the Chosen One's rule and grew into a powerful civilization. While I did try to include the Chosen One's most important and interesting actions, there are some minor things that have yet to be said, such as the Chosen One ruining Rose's unique cuisine in Modoc by shooting her Deathclaw in the eye, and let's not forget their efforts to repair the Chrysalis Highwayman, a vehicle that would later be seen in the Mojave Desert just off of Highway 95, wrecked and half buried in the ground. Some say the Chosen One remained in New Arroyo until passing on the title of Elder and joining the spirits in the afterlife. Others think they used the Highwayman to continue their travels, while few believe a descendant of the Chosen One inherited the car and used it during a quest of their own. In the end, what they managed to achieve is truly unparalleled by future heroes, and will be a tale told for generations to come. A story of how a tribal left their village to find a GECK, and in doing so, saved the world. Be sure to show your support by liking the video and subscribing if you haven't already for more Fallout content. If there's anything you'd like to see in a later video, leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. With that said, thank you, as always, for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.